So, hello and welcome everybody. My name is Dan Rodney and I'm a designer and an instructor at Noble Desktop. For those of you who aren't familiar, at Noble Desktop we teach design and code. So, of course, we teach a lot of the Adobe Creative Cloud applications, and Adobe Illustrator is one of those. So tonight we're going to take a look at getting started with Illustrator. And there's a few slides that I want to go through and just talk about some general concepts and show you some examples of things that you can do with Illustrator. And then I want to actually show you how to use Illustrator. So we're going to do some hands-on stuff with Illustrator. So for those of you who are attending live, I'm going to paste a link to this presentation into the chat. For anybody watching the recording, we'll put this link down below the video in the video description on YouTube, or if it's in a blog post or something, we'll put it in the blog post so you can get a link to this presentation if you want to review these slides later. And when using these slides, you can either swipe if you're on a touchscreen device, or you can use the arrows here. If you're on a computer, you can also use your left and right arrow keys on your keyboard as well. So what are we going to go over in this free class here? We're going to cover vectors versus pixels. What's the difference? Like, what makes Illustrator unique compared to Photoshop? What can Illustrator do? We're going to go through a variety of different things and show off things you might use Illustrator for. Not everybody realizes all the things that Illustrator can do, so we'll cover some of those most popular things. We'll quickly talk about which creative cloud plan you should have. You do need to get a Creative Cloud plan to subscription to get Illustrator, so we'll briefly talk about that. Basically, it's either get Illustrator or get all the apps, and then we'll show you how to get started with Illustrator. So we'll do a live demonstration, and I'll show you how to start using the app and how to start drawing things in it. And then, of course, we can't cover everything that Illustrator has to offer in the time that we have tonight. So then what are additional ways that you can continue learning to finish learning Illustrator? So, vectors versus pixels. So Photoshop is a pixel-based app, and Illustrator is a vector-based app. And when you think about vectors, here we have a small version and a large version. And then we have, for pixels, we have a small version and an enlarged version. And what happens is when you're enlarging things, if you're enlarging things as vectors, they're going to enlarge crisp and clean, and you can make them any size that you want, and they're going to be beautiful. When it comes to pixels, if you are enlarging pixels are these little square blocks that you enlarge. And when you make those bigger, you're going to see those little square blocks that make that up, and it's not going to look good. Now, I've exaggerated the effect in this case. This is actually a sharper version than this, but just so you can see the pixel-based effect. So when you're working in Photoshop, everything is based on these little square blocks, these little pixels. And in Illustrator, you're not. You're working with vector graphics. And so essentially behind the scenes, there are these mathematically described curves, sometimes called vectors, sometimes called Bezier curves. These vector shapes or Bezier curves are perfectly described, mathematically described. You don't have to do math or anything to do them yourself. You just use the drawing tools. But behind the scenes, they can have infinite resolution. You can make them as big as you want or as small as you want, and they always look crisp and clean and beautiful. And that's why we like Illustrator. So what can Illustrator do? There's a wide variety of things. We're just going to highlight just a few of these things. It can draw and edit those vector graphics. So, it's a vector drawing tool, so it can draw those. If you get somebody giving you vector graphics, you can edit those vector graphics. So if you download icons and stuff online, then you can download them, open them up in Illustrator, and start to work on them. And so you can, what things can you create? All sorts of graphics. So logos. Logos are created in Illustrator because when you're making a logo for a company, you never know how big you're going to use it. You might use it on a business card. You might use it on social media sites for the little icon for the company. You might use it on a billboard. You might use it on the side of a plane. Who knows? You never know how big you're going to use that logo. So you want to make it as a vector graphic so that you can make it any size you want. You don't want to create your logos in something like Adobe Photoshop because it's pixel based, and then when you enlarge that logo, then it's going to become pixelated and look ugly. So logos, absolutely, you want to create those in Illustrator. Icons, drawings, of course, it is called Illustrator, so of course illustrations and drawings of any type, but all sorts of different types of graphics. So pretty much a wide variety of different types of graphics and designs can be created. So it's not just a drawing program, it's a drawing and a design program. So you can make designs that you can use in websites, on social media, in print. You can take things into video editing programs like either Premiere Pro or doing motion graphics with After Effects. You can create a design, take it into After Effects, and animate it. You can use your graphics in apps like iOS or Android apps. You can use it in packaging. Illustrator is heavily used in packaging, fashion design, all different types of design. You can create those designs and graphics for them. You can build patterns. Patterns are useful in all sorts of design, from websites to apps to packaging to pretty much any kind of thing, including fashion design. So fashion designers often use Illustrator in doing their fashion design. So it's a wide variety of different graphics and drawings that you can create in Illustrator. This is just a few things, but the main point should be that vector graphics are useful across different types of media and across different types of design. So it's not just a drawing program, it's a design program as well. So, for example, logos. When you think about using logos, you think about using them small or all the way up through large. You never know how big you're going to make them. In the case here, the idea of responsive logos is the idea that you should have like simple logos for small things like an icon on a social media site or an app that people would download. But then as you get bigger, maybe you could have more intricate versions of your logo with extra details or something. But you want to be able to make those any size you want, and so you want a vector design tool to be able to do that, like Illustrator. Icons. Icons for anything. Icons for signage. Icons for apps. Icons for websites. Pretty much any kind of design, whether it's digital design, print design, because you might be creating a map for somebody. Let's say it's the New York City subway map. It's a map of a park. You want to mark where the restrooms are. Those are icons. So icons are useful across mediums, whether it's digital or print or video. There's often some sort of graphic or icon that you can create. You can do those in Illustrator. Of course, illustrations, and there are a wide variety of different types of illustration styles that you can do. Now, if you are not an illustrator, don't just discount and say, oh, I can't draw, so I can't use Illustrator. No, you can still do a lot of stuff with Illustrator, even if you're not a good hand illustrator. And it can be hand-drawn art that you maybe take a picture of and scan in and then trace it and create vector versions of it, or it's something that you could create from scratch entirely digitally in Illustrator. This is just an example. If I go here to either click this link or click the image, that'll go to the website of this studio that has some beautiful illustrations here. Just some beautiful illustration work here. Very kind of specific style that they have here, very kind of minimalistic, flat kind of style, but you can have any kind of illustration style that you want. This is just one example of an illustration style. But yeah, and then the beautiful thing about this is that you can draw something and then you can make it as big or small as you want when you're doing that. And it can be black and white, it can be color, it can be anything you want. You can print it, you can put it in apps, you can put it on websites, social media, whatever you want to do with your illustrations. Put them on t-shirts, anything you want. Typography. So here, this is a beautiful type illustration that was made, and you can do hand-drawn lettering that you either draw from scratch in Illustrator, or you can hand draw it in real life on a piece of paper or board or something, and then take a picture of it or scan it in and then trace it to make it a digital version, to make it a vector version. And this Eric has just beautiful work on his website. So just some gorgeous work here. And while that's loading in the background there, just to go back here, so you could have started out with an existing typeface and then added to it, so add embellishments to it, or it could be something you create completely from scratch. So even if you're not a hand letterer, if you want to create something like this, you could maybe start with a particular typeface that's close to what you want, and then you want to make it custom and unique, and then you can add embellishments. So maybe it doesn't have all these swooshes, and so you add the swooshes, or you exaggerate those things. You add the backgrounds, you add the ribbons, you add the globe, and you kind of tie it all together. So here's this page here. So this is the digital design, and then here they print it out and actually put it on a wall as like a very, very large image, probably in their office or something. But actually his work, if you look at the work here, just a bunch of beautiful work, some of which is hand-drawn stuff, some of which is entirely digitally created. Looks like my internet is going slow today. Either my internet or their website. So let's take a look at another one that was pretty cool. For example, here. Billboard in Times Square. So some beautiful typography done that was printed out and put up in Times Square. So just beautiful typography. And like I said, some of this could be potentially started from a typeface that gets converted into art and then you manipulate it, or it could be something that he would have done completely from scratch. My guess is that a lot of this he probably does completely from scratch, but some of it could be starting from a particular typeface. So typography stuff, and typography as art, or typography in logos, because you might start with a typeface and turn it into a logo. So patterns. I know this is a very subtle pattern here, but sometimes patterns are very subtle. I'll show you an example of a much more not subtle pattern in just a moment here, but sometimes patterns are just in the background of something. Sometimes they're very simple, like little polka dot pattern, or just very subtle pattern. And we use them in all different types of design, from websites to the background of things. Let's say you're doing a social media post and you want some more interesting background. You put a pattern in the backgrounds, and then you can put things over top of it. So you don't always just make a pattern just to use by itself. It's for use within your designs as backgrounds and things. Or it could be used for fashion design, because a fashion designer wants to create a pattern, which I'll show in a moment. So for example, here's an example of packaging. Packaging is often done in Illustrator, and they happen to have used patterns in their packaging. So they've combined patterns and color and typography. So they put typography in here. So the drawings here were created in Illustrator. The type was added in Illustrator, and then to actually kind of figure out, like, okay, this wraps around, and there'd be different art on the different sides. All of that stuff is done here in Illustrator for doing the packaging. So a lot of packaging design is done in Illustrator, because Illustrator can do really kind of creative things with typography and color and drawing and illustration. So you can do a lot of stuff in terms of the graphics and make interesting looking packaging. For fashion design, this is actually that same website that I linked to earlier. You might not kind of notice the style that they've done here. They did some fashion design as well. So this is that studio that I showed earlier. And this just happens to be printed on fabric instead of like a piece of paper or shown digitally. But this artwork was created in Illustrator and then could be printed on the fabric. And so you could do fashion design. In this case, it's like illustrative fashion design, but it could be that you want to do a pattern. Like, it could be as simple as a polka dot pattern, a plaid pattern, but something as more complex as like a piece of art like this. So really, Illustrator is very flexible. You can do a ton of different things in it. So those are just some examples of some of the things, just to kind of get your mind thinking of some things. Not everything that Illustrator can do, but just some things. So if you're going to purchase Illustrator, just real quickly here, if you just need Illustrator as a single application, if you don't need anything else, you can get Creative Cloud apps as a single app plan. So you can get just Illustrator by itself, Illustrator. Now these are US prices, so if you're outside the US, your prices would be different. But in the US, as of right now, it's basically $21 a month. I think they also charge tax on top of that, but $21 a month. And that's for just Illustrator by itself. If you want other apps, so if you want to add like Photoshop and InDesign, pretty much by the time you get like 2 or 3 apps, you may as well just go for the all apps plan, and that's $53 a month at the moment, plus tax. And these are if you're committing to a year's worth of the plan. So if you say, okay, I'm going to get this for a year, you are agreeing to pay for this for 12 months, and then you get access to those apps for the 12 months. It does come with additional things, not just the app. So even if you get just the single app, you do get other things, like you also get access to Adobe Fonts, which is actually a collection of about 2,000 fonts that you have access to. You can also have things like Adobe Portfolio, where you can put up your website on Adobe's portfolio site. You can have your own domain name that you do have to pay for separately, is the domain name, but this provides you hosting for a portfolio site. So you do get additional things included with the app, even if you get just the single app plan. But yeah, if you want just the app, you can get the one app, or if you want really 2 or more, then you're going to probably go with the all apps plan to get Illustrator. And so if anybody had been using older versions of Illustrator, upgrading to like the new latest version of the Creative Cloud version, things like the CS6 version it's no longer been supported. It hasn't been supported in a very long time. So Creative Cloud is the way that you get Illustrator these days. There's not a separate app to purchase of perpetual license. It's a subscription software here. So once you have Illustrator, you can start using it. So let me show you how to start using Illustrator. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and launch Illustrator here. I already have it running, so it launches very quickly. And I'm going to create a new document. I can either click Create New Document here, or File, New Document up here. And there are some presets here. And you can see you can design for mobile devices if you're doing app design. There's common web sizes if you're doing screen design for websites. If you're doing print, they give you some common print page sizes, some US sizes, some European sizes. If you're doing film and video, you've got video screen sizes. So you've got things like HD, you've got 4K, 8K, depending on the video resolution you're going to be working for. And the art and illustration goes into like postcards and posters and, letter size pages and that sort of stuff. And so you kind of choose the kind of design you're going to do. So for example, if you're going to do web design, you're going to be working in pixels, and you're going to be working with RGB color as opposed to CMYK. Now, if you're doing print stuff, then you'd probably not be using pixels. You'd be using something like points, or you can switch to something else. If you're used to inches or millimeters or centimeters, you can use those. You can choose whatever measurement system you want. So let's say I choose inches, for example. We've got an 8.5 by 11 letter size page, but for print, we're working in CMYK color. So you're choosing your category, the kind of thing you're going to do, because it's going to choose your color that you're going to work in, because anything that's on screen, video, web, apps, those are always RGB colors that you work with. And in print, we print in CMYK colors. Those are the inks that we print with. So, you choose film or video, that's going to be RGB. So that's why you're choosing it. And it does also switch the units of measurement as well. So let's say I'm going to do something for on screen. So I choose web. I'll just choose the most common size here. And it's RGB. Now, as I'm drawing here, it doesn't really matter which kind of file that I'm in. And if you ever start with one kind of file, you can always switch it to another kind of file later on. So if I click create, that'll create my document on my screen here. But if I ever do need to convert from one color mode to another, for example, I can always go to File and switch from RGB to CMYK later. So you can always repurpose your digital artwork for print, or the other way around. You can take your CMYK printed art and convert it over to RGB. So we do that through File, New. All right, so when you first get started, they have a very simplified interface. Now, it used to be that Illustrator showed more tools by default, and they showed a control panel up here at the top. In recent versions, what they've done is they've tried to simplify the app. Illustrator has a lot of tools. And so their thought was people get overwhelmed by the tools, so we want to limit how many tools you see by default. I get the idea of that, but the problem is that if you're ever watching a tutorial and you're watching somebody that knows how to use Illustrator and they have the full toolbar, and then you're using this kind of simplified toolbar, it then confuses people to say, well, wait, I don't have a tool that this other person has. So these tools are things like drawing rectangles, for example. You can go in and you can draw a rectangle. So these are the tools that you're going to use to do things. There's actually two toolbars. Under Window, we can choose between the basic, which is the default toolbar, where you don't see all the tools, and then Advanced. In Advanced, you see more tools. Now, you can still view this as a single column toolbar like this, or you can view it as a two-column toolbar. It's the same number of tools, just laid out slightly differently. I tend to like the single column toolbar here because it lets me see more of my document, and it doesn't take up quite as much screen space on my screen at this time. So I'm going to go to the single column, but you can notice how many more tools we have here. So that's something to keep in mind, that by default, when you first launch Illustrator, they don't show you all the tools that you have in the program. And so that's here under toolbars. The other thing is this thing called a workspace. So the workspace, the default workspace you're in is called Essentials. And the workspace it's actually your toolbar and your panels that you see over here. It's the interface that you have. They only show you three different panels over here. And the properties panel is meant to be that you select something that you've drawn. Let's say, for example, I use my rectangle tool and I draw something. It then will show you settings for what you've drawn. You can change the fill color, you can change the stroke color if you want, or change how thick that stroke is so you can make it thicker. The stroke is like a border, as you'd call it elsewhere. And so it shows you things based on what you have selected. If you use the type tool and you click to make some type, then you're going to see type options here, like the type size that you can change. So it's going to change those properties based on what you have selected. And they've kind of, Adobe's gone to this properties panel in InDesign, Illustrator, and Photoshop in all the programs. The only thing is that I'm not as much of a fan of it because it takes up a lot of screen space. There is a control panel that we've had for a long time, which I like because it's very efficient in terms of wasting screen space. It doesn't waste much screen space. It's very small. You can fit a lot of stuff in it. So I really like this control panel. And they hide it by default now. But this control panel here shows you a bunch of things without taking up much space on your screen. So I like to show that control panel. And if I like to do all of these things, like show the bigger toolbar, to show the control panel, all of this stuff is combined into this thing called a workspace. I like the Essentials Classic, the previous version of this, where they showed the full advanced toolbar, where they showed the control panel, and where they showed a variety of other panels over here on the right. Now, I've been using this interface before, so I'm going to go in and I'm just going to reset it to the factory defaults of like, what would this be if you first launched the Essentials Classic workspace? And that just cleans everything back up. So you can see there's a lot more panels here. Instead of just showing 3 panels over here on the right, now we can see a lot more things. And these are panels that you're going to go into and you're going to set things in these. So I think it's useful to have these panels over here. So that's one of the first things I like to do, is just go to the Essentials Classic workspace. And that way we get the control panel and we get the bigger toolbar, the advanced toolbar over here on the left. Okay, so that said, now we can get started doing things. For example, drawing. If I go to one of these tools, if there's a little triangle at the bottom right corner, that means there's some hidden tools. Not every tool has hidden tools, like for example, the gradient tool does not. There's no hidden tools behind that, but most of your other tools do have some hidden tools. And they put related tools together, so these are all the kind of drawing of basic shapes. And then we have the line tools as well. So if you click and hold on the rectangle, you'll get circles and polygons and these various different shapes. So you choose the one that you want, and then you can draw. And as long as you are in this rectangle tool, you're going to keep getting rectangles every time you draw. When you're done using the rectangle tool, you want to come back to your selection tool. The selection tool is like your pointer thing. It lets you move these shapes around. And if you click on one, you can delete it. So this is kind of like your normal tool that you keep coming back to once you're done with the other tools, because as long as you're in the rectangle tool, every single time you drag, you're going to get a new rectangle. So at some point you're going to be like, stop making the rectangles. So you go back to your selection tool. We'll come back to talk about the direct selection tool a little bit later, but for right now, we're going to limit it to just the selection tool. So I can click on things to delete them. I can move them around. I get these resize handles when I click on something, so I can resize this. Now, you might notice that everything that I'm doing here has this nice kind of preview as I'm doing this, and there is a preference that I want to make sure that you set. It's to make sure that you're seeing the same kind of thing, assuming your computer is capable of doing it. On the Mac, we get to our preferences under the Illustrator menu. We go to Illustrator, Preferences. On Windows, we get to our Preferences menu through the Edit menu. So on Windows, you'd go to Edit, and Preferences would be down here towards the bottom. Once you get into Preferences, then you see the same stuff on Mac and PC. And it's the Performance preference, I believe, if I remember right. Yes. So in Performance, in recent versions, I think this was added in 2020, if I remember right, they have this newer feature called real-time drawing and editing. And if that is an option on your computer, you definitely want to turn it on. Now, it's possible your computer won't support it because you need a good enough graphics card. Your GPU is your graphics processing unit, and that's how powerful your video card is, or your graphics card. If your graphics card is not powerful enough, it won't support this. So it's possible this might not be enabled on your computer, but if this is an option, if you can turn it on and it's not already turned on, I would advise turning it on. So let me show you if it's not on, what the difference is here. So now when I move this around, you see how I just see an outline until I let go? If I resize, I just see an outline until I let go. It's not doing a live preview. Even when I draw something, let's say I draw a circle, I just see an outline of it. I don't actually see the fill until I let go. And I know that's, at first glance, you're like, not a big deal. But once you get used to this real-time drawing and editing, it's so much nicer. So you turn that on. And now when I move, the shape actually moves. When I resize, we actually see the shape actually resizing. So everything we do is just done with a live preview, and it's so much nicer. So if your computer can handle it, see, even when I'm drawing, I see the shape actually being pulled out instead of just that outline of things. So if your computer can handle it, turn it on. It's definitely preferred. If it's not there, or it's grayed out or something, it just means your computer can't handle that. Your graphics card is not powerful enough. So, all right. When we are moving around within our file, we need to be able to zoom in and out. There is a zoom tool over here at the bottom left of your toolbar. You can drag to the right or drag to the left to zoom in and out. The thing that you put your cursor in is the thing you're going to be zooming in or out on. So think of this as like a scrubber. We drag to the right to zoom in, or drag to the left to zoom out. So we can zoom in and out. And then once we zoom in, this is the beauty of vectors, is you can keep zooming in forever, and it's always crisp and clean no matter what. And see, that's the key difference of pixels versus vector. Let me go to my files here, and I'm going to open up this Illustrator file here. And this is a vector graphic. If I zoom in on this, this is crisp and clean and perfect edges. There's no pixelized edges or anything, just crisp, clean lines. No matter how far I zoom in, I'm never going to see big, chunky, pixelated blocks of color. And so it's always crisp and clean. You can make this thing as big or as small as you want, and it's always looking good. If I open up the pixel-based version of this, so this has been converted into a Photoshop file. When I zoom in, so here I'm in Photoshop, which is a pixel-based editing program. If I zoom in on that, now we see the individual pixels. And so instead of these beautifully crisp, clean lines, we see pixels, these square blocks. And so imagine drawing something in Photoshop and then realizing you made it too small. And then when you enlarge it, you see all of these pixels. Instead of being in Illustrator, if you draw in Illustrator, you can zoom in as much as you want. And when I say zooming in would also be like printing something really, really large. So when you print something, it prints at the full resolution of your printer, as sharp and crisp as it can be at any size whatsoever. We had a question in the chat, does this crispiness apply to type as well? Absolutely. So everything that you do in Illustrator is all vector graphics. Type is vector, and it's just when you're in Photoshop, things get converted into pixels. So in Photoshop, for example, if I was to add type, and I click to make some type, you're going to see that even though technically the type itself is vector behind the scenes, you're still in a pixel-based file. So you're going to zoom in and see those pixelated edges on your type. But if you were to do that in Illustrator, so I go to my Illustrator file and I make some type, and when you zoom in on that, there's not going to be any pixelated edges. Always crisp, clean, beautiful. Here I'm at 64,000% zoom. At the bottom left corner of my screen, I see the 64,000%, and it's still beautiful. Whereas in Photoshop here, I'm only at 700% and already seeing a ton of pixelization. So that's the really key difference is in the pixel-based versus vector-based. And of course, how you draw and work with the stuff. So there's a quality difference and just a different way of working with these graphics. I'm going to go back and fit everything in the window. So I'm just going to say fit all in window, and that just zooms back out to see the whole thing. Once you have zoomed in, while you can use your scroll bars to move around, in Illustrator especially, it's really picky about that. So I don't really like using my scroll bars in Illustrator, and that's because if you zoom way out, you really are in this giant workspace. So there's this huge workspace, and your teeny little page is sitting in this giant workspace, and your scroll bar scrolls through that entire workspace. So if you're zoomed in to just this itty bitty page in that giant workspace, when you scroll, you're like, whoa, all the way up to the top, whoa, all the way to the bottom. And you got to find that little teeny page sitting in the middle of this giant workspace. And so it's just so easy to like accidentally scroll the whole way past your page, and that's not very fun. So I like to use the hand tool. And the hand tool is just a much more efficient way of moving around because you can move in any direction, not just up and down, left and right. You can move diagonally. The hand tool is just a scrolling tool. And in all good design programs, they have a hand tool. And in all the Adobe apps, they have a hand tool. And in fact, it's something I do all the time. I want to use that hand tool. But let's say you're drawing a shape and you want to scroll down a little bit. You don't want to have to take the time to go to this hand tool, slide down, switch back to your rectangle tool just to be able to move. You want to be able to move really quickly. So in all Adobe apps, you can just hit the space bar, and the space bar gives you the hand tool. So I could just hold that space bar, move around, and when I let go, I'm still in the rectangle tool. So it's just temporary for me to quickly switch over to the hand tool by holding down my space bar, let go of the space bar, and I can be drawing and continuing here. So I had another question in the chat. Would pixels be better to work for color gradients than vectors or vector gradients? So vector gradients, because you have like infinite resolution here, vector gradients can be nice. You can technically have banding or striping of colors in any program. Like you can have banding in Photoshop, or you could potentially have banding in Illustrator. So it just depends on the type of graphics you're creating, but you can have good gradients, good color gradients in either of the apps, in either Photoshop or Illustrator. All right, so I got a bunch of things in here. Now, as I'm working, Illustrator does have unlimited undos over everything you do in the program. So if you want to just keep going back and saying undo, 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 you can keep doing that since you last opened up the file. Now, undos are not going to be saved with the file, so don't expect them to be there if you save the file and close it. When you reopen it back up, there's not going to be a history of your undos, but while you still have the file open, it's unlimited undos over everything you have in the program. So if you make a mistake, you can always go back to undo. If you're used to Photoshop, which has a history panel, you're not going to find that history panel in pretty much any other Adobe app. That is something unique to Photoshop, that there's a history panel. None of the other apps have it. So InDesign does not, Illustrator does not, other apps do not have a history panel. That is something unique to only Photoshop. So don't expect to have a history panel in here. Oh, and we had a question about the hand tool. You do have to hold the space bar down while dragging, and it's when you let go of the space bar that you're done with the hand tool. So if I'm drawing here and then I want to move, I'm going to hold the space bar, drag around while I'm holding the space bar, and then when I let go of the space bar, now I'm back in the tool that I was in. Yep. And then I come back to my selection tool to move these things around, delete them, and select things so that I can change them. So once you have a shape selected, you can then look over here to either the properties panel to change things like fill or stroke, or you can also look up here in the control panel. In the control panel, they'll have two icons, one for the fill, and you can change the fill color there, and then another one for the stroke color. So right now I don't have a stroke. The red slash means none. So if I choose to do an orange color there, can't really see it because I'm too far out here, but I'm going to make the stroke bigger, and then we can see that. So now we have a much bigger stroke or border, and now we can see that. So now when I go back in there, you can change to a different color. By default, when you click on these buttons, you're going to see the swatches panel where you can save pre-made swatches. And in this interface, they don't have a button to click to switch back and forth. When you're looking in the properties panel over here on the right, they have a nice little button to switch back and forth between your color mixer and your pre-made colors. These are just a few pre-made colors. They're obviously not all the colors. So they have a color mixer that you can switch to. And this will be in whatever color mode you started working in. Although if you ever need to switch, like let's say somebody says, well, in my print design, I use this CMYK color. Can you input that into your RGB design? You can go into the menu and you can choose how you want to input your colors. And even though you can be inputting it in a CMYK color, it will convert it into your RGB colors for your RGB file. Likewise, if you're in a CMYK file and somebody gives you a hex code from the website, you can switch from CMYK into RGB, and then you could paste in your hex code that a developer gives you from their coding. You also can just mix up a color down here by just dragging through this little color ramp, so that you can choose a color that way. If you like these kind of two little color modes here, this swatches versus color mixer, you can do that up here. It's just the default is that when you click on here, you only get the swatches. But what about the color mixer? If I hold and just pause my mouse over that icon, it says hold shift key to bring up alternate color UI. In other words, user interface, like hold shift to bring up the other color picker, the color mixer. So normal click is swatches. Shift click is color mixer. So then I can mix up any color I want. Same thing with the border, the stroke. If I click on that, I get my swatches, but if I hold shift and click, I get the color mixer. So pay attention to the tooltips. When you mouse over, read those tooltips and they will tell you some valuable information that you have there. All right. So you have your shapes, right? You got things like rectangles and circles. And if you do a rectangle, you can also do a rounded rectangle. But whichever one you choose, you can actually go back and edit that when you're done. So if I choose selection and my selection tool up here, I can then go, there's a little extra dot near the corners, and that's your roundness amount. So if I go here to my square cornered rectangle, I can go to these little dots and I can pull those in, and that will round those corners. So the square corners, those are the resize handles. You're going to resize your shape. So you're going to make it wider or taller, or you can grab the corner and do both. But if you go to that little circle, that little dot right there, you can drag that in or out when you're doing that. if I hold, let's see, well, we'll come back to that. Okay, so when we're drawing here, if I hold shift, I make perfect versions of these. So not holding shift, I get a rectangle. Holding shift, I get a perfect square. Same thing with a circle or the ellipse tool. Normally, you drag it out, you get an oval. If you hold shift, you get a perfect circle. So shift is going to constrain you to perfection. You're going to get a perfect example of that thing. It also constrains you when you move. So if you want to move directly, horizontally, or vertically, you can hold shift, and then that way you move only in one direction. So you only move up, or you only move to the side as you're doing this. But let's keep going with some of these basic tools. The polygon tool, for example. You drag out a polygon. Now, when you're drawing these things, there's some neat little tips to know about with using these basic tools. A lot of people just see the basic tools, they draw them out, and they're like, okay, they are what they are. But there's some neat little hidden secrets in these tools. So, for example, of course you can change the roundness here on that, right? But while you're drawing, while I'm holding down, before I let go of the mouse, I can use my up arrow to increase the roundness or my down arrow to decrease the roundness. Ooh, look at that. I can make it more or less rounded while I'm drawing. And then when I let go, it's got that amount. Now you might say, well, that's not too impressive because I can always change that afterwards, right? But it's useful for other tools. So for example, with the polygon. Now, technically the polygon, when you draw it out, you can go back in and there's a little dot of its own. And that dot, you can round that, right? So you got the same roundness factor, so you can round it more or less. And then there's this control right here. So let me zoom in on this. This control right here lets you change the number of sides afterwards. So it used to be that the polygon never let you change the number of sides. Now they're smart enough that they let you change the number of sides. You could do more or less. But you can use that up and down arrow trick while you're drawing. So when you're using that polygon tool, while you draw it out, you can use your up and down arrows to change how many sides you're going to get while you're drawing, while you're still holding the mouse down before you let go. Now once you let go, then you'd have to use the controls that are on it. So then I'd have to go to this and I'd have to increase the number of sides to change that. Same trick works on something like the star tool. As I'm drawing, I can use my up and down arrow key to change the number of points on that star. And unlike the polygon, the star tool doesn't let you change the number of points afterwards. Something I'm disappointed in the star tool is the star tool is not smart. Like once it's done, it's done. You can't go back and change how pointy they are. You can't go back in and change the number of points. It's something you do while you're originally drawing it. So down arrow to reduce, up arrow to increase the number of points. Now we had a question in the chat, which I think is a good question. Where does the amount of roundness show up? So for example here, when you're changing this, right, you're putting in a specific amount. Now as you drag, you can see the number, but if you want to be precise, you can double click on the point there, the roundness point, and you're going to actually see this transform panel pop open, and you can actually change and dial in a specific amount there. And I just got to that by double clicking on that, and I could get to that amount. Oh, and we had a question. Somebody said, why did my polygon change into a circle? Well, if you have too many sides, you have something that almost is a circle. So you got to be careful about how long you hold the up arrow, because if you hold it too long, boom, you get a circle. So you got to go down. So don't hold the up arrow, just press it once or twice or 3 times. Don't hold it down, because if you hold it down, you're going to quickly get to a circle. It's technically not a circle because there's just so many sides to it. And if you're starting with that, if you're starting with a circle, it just means that the last time you drew something, that it was made with that many sides. You can come back in later in the transform panel here, and you can change the number of sides here as an amount here. So the tool remembers what was done last. So it's going to use the same number of sides. So if it had a lot of sides before, it's going to have a lot of sides this time. So I could lower that down. And so it's going to remember what you did the last time when you used those up and down arrow keys. So if I use my down arrow to go to here, so now each time I do it, I get a triangle. If I hit my up arrow a couple times like that, each time I get that now, every time I do it. All right, but you can always change those later on in the transform panel. With any of these panels, like in this case, I got this by double clicking on the little circle for roundness. But if you want to get to the transform panel, all those panels can be found under window. So you can go down here and see they're all alphabetically listed. So the transform panel shows you different things you can use to transform an object, like the width and the height and the number of sides, for example, and the amount of roundness on things. So you might think, oh, the basic tools, you know, am I going to really use those a whole lot? To be honest, you might use your basic tools a lot more than you'd think, because when you're drawing something, you can turn something complex. You can create something complex by building up a lot of little small building blocks. So let's say, for example, you want to draw like a half circle, or you want to draw a cloud, or you want to draw a Pac-Man or something. When you break those more complex shapes down into basic shapes, you can draw things more easily. So there are drawing tools like the pen tool, which I'm going to get to in a little bit, which give you a lot of precision, but you have to be precise about the way that you're going to draw things. And so we'll come back to that in just a little bit. But before we do, I want to show how you can build up complex shapes by making a bunch of little easy to draw shapes and build up something that's much more interesting. Because that's going to save you from having to like hand draw something. So for example, like there's a pencil tool which you can use to draw. That's like a free-form drawing tool, but like that's kind of sketchy there. I don't want that kind of thing for what I want to do here. So let's say you want to draw like a Pac-Man, for example. Pac-Man has like a little eye, it's got a mouth. So there's a circle that we'd start with, and I'm going to draw this circle out by holding shift. I make it a perfect circle, and I'm going to go into my color here, and Pac-Man is yellow. So we're going to make yellow here. And so there I got my little Mr. Pac-Man. And if I want to make this stand out a little bit more, I'm going to draw a different background for this. So let me use my rectangle tool to draw out a different color background. So I'm going to make this, I'll make it black. And I'm going to say arrange, so it's object, and then I'm going to go down to arrange and say send to back. And this is going to send it to the back. Each new shape you create is put on top of previous ones, so we can send it to the back. So now it's behind this. There we go. So I'm going to pull this out here. And just so I don't accidentally move this background as I'm working, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to say object, and I'm going to say lock that selection. And that way I don't accidentally work with it. So now as I make selections, I can't accidentally move that background. At any point later, I can go in and say unlock it, and then it'll just unlock everything. But I'm just going to temporarily lock that background there. So I got my little Pac-Man head there. Now what I want to do is I want to put a eyeball in here. And so I'm going to draw another circle with my ellipse tool. I'm going to hold shift to make it a perfect circle. And I'm going to fill that with black as well. I'm then going to draw a polygon. Draw that out. Now I'm going to use my down arrow a couple times to get a triangle. And then I'm going to pull this in here. So here I've got a little Pac-Man mouth. Hello everybody, how are you doing? Little Mr. Pac-Man here. Okay, you can do your own sound effects. Let me make this mouth a little bigger. He wants to chomp on some yum-yums. Now, as long as the eyeball and the triangle match the backgrounds, then Mr. Pac-Man looks correct. But if I move him off of his background, now it doesn't look correct. So I've technically not eaten holes out of him. I've not punched holes out of him. And so I'd like to really make him correctly. Especially like, let's say, for example, I put a stroke on him. So I'm going to go to the stroke, and let's put a red stroke on this and make it thicker. See, only the outer shape actually got the stroke. It didn't come in and outline this shape right here as well. So I'd really want the red to be on all of the edges, not just this. But see, this is its own shape. And this is a separate shape. And this is a separate shape. They're not really being combined into one. So you can kind of fake it. You can create like an optical illusion where it looks like you drew the yellow shape as a shape, but I actually want to make it correct. So let me pull this over here to the side for us to kind of, or actually, you know what? Let's not pull over side. Let's put it here, and I'm going to unlock the background and just change the color of the background to a different color. Like I'll make it, well, that's a little vibrant there. Let's make it a little more subtle. Let's do that. Okay. So what I want to do, and let's lock this again. Lock selection. I want to actually cut this out like a donut hole. Cut that out of there. And that is called Pathfinder. Pathfinder is wonderful for creating complex shapes out of very basic shapes. So I'm going to choose the Pathfinder. And so that was under Window, Pathfinder. And if this is a panel that you like to use a lot, you can actually dock it over here to the side, drag it over here, so that it's there all the time. And let's say you like a line, you can drag that over there as well to put it in there. And oh, transform was useful, so we could just put all of them. In fact, I could have just dragged the whole group. If you grab one tab, you just drag that one tab. But if you grab the empty part of the whole group, you can actually dock the entire group all at once. So, so I'm going to do the transform Pathfinder here. Sorry, Pathfinder. So I'm going to select these guys here, and we can unite things to bring them together. So we're going to, that would be like a merging of them. That's not what I want to do. Minus front, that's what I want to do, because I want to subtract this top shape, the one that's in front, from the back shape. So if I select those two things and I click minus front, that actually punches a hole. So now I've got like a donut hole. See, I can actually see through that. Then I can do the same thing with the mouse. The mouth the mouth as well. I'm going to select those two shapes and subtract the front shape, minus front. Boom. So now I've got Mr. Pac-Man with an actual hole for his mouth, with an actual hole for the eye. And so now that is a correct, more complex shape that's been made out of basic component shapes. Now if I put a stroke on that, now you can see how the stroke is put on the entire shape. Cool, that's good. The only thing is that the default way that the Pathfinder works is what I like to call destructive. And what I mean by that is, let's say I want to go back in and make changes. I don't have the original triangle there anymore. Like it's kind of eaten this part out. So if I ever want to move that mouth, how would I do that? So let's talk about the difference between the selection tool and the direct selection tool. We'll come back and we'll work with this Pac-Man again in just a moment. So let's say you draw some shapes. Let's say a rectangle tool, for example. You draw out that shape. The selection tool is the whole. So this black arrow here, that's the whole shape. This direct selection tool, that's more direct. It selects parts. So we got the whole and the part. With the direct selection tool, I can click off of the shape to make sure the points are deselected. And then I can come back in and select just one point in particular and just move that one point around. So both of these tools are good tools that we like to use. When we're using the selection tool, we move this around as a whole unit. The direct selection tool lets you grab just one point and move just that one point around. So using that idea, I can come back into my Pac-Man shape, and if I use the selection tool here, that moves the entire shape. If I use the direct selection tool, that lets me click on an individual point and move just that individual point. So while I can grab this point and kind of change it around, like do something like that, what gets trickier is when I try to grab this and move it, so it's changing like the shape of his nose. Like if I want like a big nosed Pac-Man, that's fine. But if I want him to be a perfect circle, it's not easy to move that around anymore. And so that's just not the way I want to manipulate this. So what would have been better is to create him in a different way. And so let's say I draw him with the circle. I draw his little eye. And then I draw his mouth with the polygon tool. Put that there. Go back to my selection tool, like so. And if it helps, I could get rid of the stroke. I could say none. And then go into fill and say black, if that makes it easier to see, is kind of like that's the hole that you'll be eating out of it. Black fill for that. No stroke for that. All right. So now let's say you're going to punch that hole in. There's kind of a secret way, a little bit hidden. It's in the tooltip, so it's not super hidden, but if you actually read your tooltips, that's the only way you'd notice it. So when you mouse over this, it says minus front, and then it gives you a little tip. It says option click to create a compound shape and subtract from shape area. That's a lot of verbiage, but basically, if you just click it, it's destructive. It actually eats out of that shape. And like, let's say you're doing the triangle. When you do that, you lose your original triangle. All right. So I'm going to undo that. I was just doing the keyboard shortcut for undoing, which is Command Z on the Mac or Control Z on Windows. So let me do the eyeball first here. If you option click on the Mac or alt click on Windows, this creates a compound shape. This is a live editable shape. So if I option click on the Mac or alt click on Windows, when I do these, then it's unique because when I go in with the direct selection tool, I can go in and, ooh, look at that. The original triangle's still there. It's still actually present. So I can move it around and it's always live eating out of my shape. So that's much nicer because I get to go back in and edit that. So it's kind of a little bit of a secret, and it's because over the years there's been two different kind of schools of thought of whether they want it to be destructive by default or editable by default. I've always been in the camp that I like the editable by default, but I didn't win out over the other non-editable camp. So the default is that when you just click on that button, it's destructive. I like it to be editable, so I always have to hold the option key on the Mac or alt on Windows, and then you can get this live shape, which to me is just so much better that I can go back in and tweak that. And I still get them eaten out, you know, so it's kind of eaten out that hole. So I got the donut hole for the eye, I've got the mouth actually removed. And so you can make these more complex shapes out of some very basic shapes. Let me open up some this icons file here. So let's say you want to create something like this cloud icon there. When you break it down into the basics of it, it's a circle, and a circle with a flat line underneath. And then we'll get to that lightning stuff a little bit in a moment. But I could draw, let's say, a circle. And for that color, I'd get rid of my stroke, so I'd say no stroke there. And then I'll choose a color there. So I've got one of these circles. And then I could draw another one, because it might not be the same size. Like maybe this one's a little smaller, or maybe a little bigger. And then I can use my selection tool to move that into place. And then I could draw another one. Maybe this one's a little smaller, like so. They could be different sizes. And then when I align this, you'll see that there'll be a bunch of little smart guides that line up as you're drawing. So they'll line up with like other shapes and stuff. So as I do this, as I come down, you'll see that line up so that the bottom of those two things line up with each other. So you draw that down and then it's going to kind of snap into that. It might snap with other things, so you just have to be a little patient here as you're drawing it. There. So that snapped in. So now I know I'm lined up there. Now I need to fill in that bottom part with a rectangle. So I'll use my rectangle tool to fill in this bottom part. And see, you can take these basic shapes and make a more complex shape out of them. Now, technically speaking, these are all just a combination of multiple shapes. They don't actually act like one, meaning that if I were going to put like an outline on this, maybe I want to have a black stroke all the way around. It's still technically 3 circles and a rectangle. if I want to merge them together, I can use that Pathfinder to merge them together. So in this case, I'd want to unite them into one. So I'm going to select all of those and then click Unite. Now, if I click Unite, remember that the default is destructive. So before I do that, let me just show you another view. In Illustrator, we have an outline view and we have a preview. In preview, you get to see fills and strokes. You get to see how things are going to look. In outline mode, you just see the outlines, the shape of the vector graphics, but you don't see the fills, you don't see the outlines. It's like a wireframe mode. Everything's just like a piece of wire. And that way you do get to see the basic shapes that make things up. So if I did this destructively, when I click Unite, it unites into a single shape. When I switch into outline mode, notice it's only one outline. I lost my individual 3 circles and rectangle. And that means it's really hard to edit now. There's no way for me to easily go in and change things, because when I use the direct selection tool, now they're not circles anymore. They're just one shape. And so that's just not cool. So I'm going to undo that and go back to when I had all those shapes. Let's go back into preview mode. And I'm going to select those there. And this time, instead of just clicking Unite, I'm going to do the Option click, or on Windows, Alt click. And that's going to unite them, but it still keeps them as individual paths. So if I go into outline mode, I still have all my outlines. I still have all those separate shapes. So that means that when I go in to edit, I can go in and I can select this shape here and I can move it around. Oh, look at that. I still have my circle. Like, this is still one circle. This is still another circle. And this is still my rectangle that connects them. So let me just undo that. So like this one, I can select that. And then when I come back in with my selection tool, I get my resize handles and I can make that bigger or smaller. And I get something that I can edit. This is treated like a group. So if you want to use your selection tool to do all the editing, you can double click to go into the group and then move the things within the group. That way you don't have to keep switching back and forth between the selection and direct selection tools. So you can tweak these things. You do just have to keep in mind that, you got to make sure your rectangle doesn't stick out there too much. You got to make sure that that kind of lines up with like the bottom of that circle so they kind of line up nicely. But your smart guides will help you to line up with that. Kind of locks on there when you're good. So just so much more flexible using the Pathfinder in this kind of live edit mode. So much more flexible. And it's not the default, it's kind of a little bit of a hidden secret, but once you know, you can create really cool shapes. And so that's how you can create like a shape like this. You just take the basics. You take like a rectangle, make one of those little prongs. And let's say I get rid of the stroke here, and I'll just do this as black just so we can focus on the shape that I'm drawing. And then I can hold Option to make a copy. So if you Option drag, you make a copy. Alt drag on Windows. So Alt drag on Windows, Option drag on the Mac. Now I'd need a half circle. Now I have a full circle tool that I could draw holding Shift, but I need to cut the top half off. So for the top half, I would draw a rectangle and I'd cover over the top half. And I could take this top half and I can cut it out of this bottom. So keep in mind, this is a separate shape, right? So if I put a different color on there. So 2 different shapes. I can then select these 2 and I could subtract the top. I can minus front. I'm going to Option click just so that I can keep it live. So if I ever want to go in there and move this around, I can change, like, do I want more or less of that being subtracted so it's live the whole time. And then I can put this underneath, and the whole thing actually needs to get a little bit bigger, so let me make that bigger. And let's say here. And see, the beauty of this being a live shape is that you can double click to go in there and make it shorter or taller. You can play around with that later on. It's nice. So then I can select those all and I can unite them. So I'd Option click to unite them. And I'm doing the uniting so that it ends up working like one whole shape in the end. And so you can build it up. You can put it on the stem and then eat it out of the background. And so let me just do one more shape and then we'll be done. We don't have to build the whole thing here. So let me make this a different color. Send it to the back. Oops. Arrange. Object, arrange, send to back. Put this here in the middle. And you can do perfect alignments and stuff on things. But let me select all this. And I will Option click on minus front to subtract it. And that way we actually have a hole cut in. So if you want to see through to other things, that's actually a hole cut in. So you can imagine building that up. Pretty cool. All right, so now let's talk about something more complex like this. If you were going to create something like this, if you were going to create the rectangle, that's the easy part. That's like just a rounded rectangle. So you can draw that out. I'm going to hold Shift to make sure it's a perfect square. And then I'd go back in with my selection tool and make that smaller. And if you want to rotate, you can go just not on the actual resize handle, but near it, and you'll get a new cursor that shows to rotate. So you resize or you rotate. If you're just right outside of the handle, you're going to get a rotate icon. And so you can start to rotate here. If I hold Shift, it snaps to 45 or 90 degree angles. So that way I can get that perfect 45 degree angle there. And then I can choose my fill. I could choose my stroke. Choose how thick I want that stroke to be. So there I've got like my background for that. And then for drawing the fire that's on there. So here I have something that I can trace over. When you're drawing digitally, you can, if you want, you can hand draw something and then bring that in and trace over top of it. You can just draw out of your own mind, or there's a variety of different ways you can do it. So in here I have something to trace on so that you know what I want to draw. Now, how do we get something like that in here? Well, one of the ways we can do that is if we have a sketch that we've taken a picture of on our phone, or we've scanned it in. So let's say, for example, here I have a Photoshop file. It doesn't even have to be like the best quality of stuff, because especially if you're going to go in, you're going to trace it over and clean it up. Even if it's not the best quality, that would be okay. But ideally, you'd have something that's a little bit higher quality. So you do either a better quality picture or a higher resolution scan, whatever it is. And then you can trace over these kind of things. There are ways that Illustrator can trace for you, but if you want the cleanest kind of thing, tracing it yourself is going to give you the cleanest quality. Now, doing something like this, of course, you might not want to spend all the time to trace it, so you might want Illustrator to do the tracing for you. But let's say, how do we bring in those kind of things to trace over? When you go to File, place means to import something. We can place those things into Illustrator. And I'm going to go to my desktop here, go into my files, and let's just say I'm going to grab that elephant. The key thing here is if I'm not seeing options, I want to make sure I see the options, and I want to check on template. This is going to turn it into a template layer so that I can trace on top of it. And just so you can see what's going to happen, let me cancel that for a second. I want to show you my layers panel, because that's where this is going to go. Under Window, I can go to Layers. And the Layers panel shows you layers that you have. Now, I already have the fire to trace over. I already created that layer and I locked it. But if you were viewing this as a new file, your new files would only have a single layer. So you just start out with one layer. This is where you put all of your objects and you draw those things. So let me close that and come back. So normally you're just going to start off with layer 1. So imagine that this is not there for right now. You just have layer 1. And then when you place that in as a template, so I'm going to choose this and I'm going to say template, as in tracing templates. I don't have to keep this as a link. If I have it as a link, I need to keep this file around. If I uncheck link, it'll just embed it into this one file. So that way I don't have to keep this original file around. I think when I'm tracing it, Most of the time I just like to embed it right into the document. But the most important thing here is template. Got to check on template. And then that's going to create a new template layer. Your dark artwork will be grayed out because it's kind of like putting like a sheet of tracing paper. Right? If you've ever taken a piece of tracing paper is transparent, so you can trace over top of things, or like a piece of vellum put on top of something. And it's like we put a tracing piece of paper on top of this. Now you can actually double click on your layer to set how dim these things are going to be. So you can dim it a lot, or you can dim it, if you double click on the right hand side here, you can dim it just a little bit. And the idea is as you trace over, you want that to be a little bit light so you can see the difference between the stuff you're drawing and the thing that's underneath. And that is now a locked layer. And so we can't accidentally move it around. Although if you want to move it temporarily just before you start tracing, you can unlock it, move it into position, and then lock it before you start to draw. And then you can start to draw on top of it. And so now that you have something to trace on, which is what I have for my fire. Let me drag that to the trash. So here I have my fire to trace over. I can now have a guide for drawing. Now the guide that I'm going to have, it might be very loose. I might need to clean it up. It might be very precise. Like in this case, it's very precise. You don't always start with something precise like this, but it could be a hand-drawn sketch, and you can stay as accurate to it, or you can deviate as much as you want. It just depends on what you're starting from as to how closely you're going to trace that. But we need to be able to kind of draw this stuff. There are several drawing tools that you can use. The pencil tool is for free form drawing. So if you like something very free form, kind of organic shape, the pencil tool can be good for that. In something like this with its super precise, super clean, smooth shapes, not going to be the best tool, I don't think, for that. But let me just show you. So let me go back to layer 1 and have that selected. And let's say I was going to draw this. So I'd have to hold the mouse down the whole time. And so if I move a little bit, like that's part of my drawing now. Now I can always go back and fix things, but you can see like if I'm wiggling my mouse, it's not the smoothest thing. And when I'm all done, if I come back to the beginning point, I'll see a little circle on my cursor. And when I let go, it kind of smoothed things out a little bit, but it's just not the smoothest that I can get. I could certainly do better, but let me just go in and put the black on there. See, it's kind of wobbly. And if you have a drawing tablet, like let's say you have a Wacom tablet or something, which is a pressure sensitive drawing tablet, you might be able to draw a little bit better with the pencil tool. But for the most part, the pencil tool is meant to be kind of organic kind of shapes, more free form, not super precise shapes, but the organic kind of free form feeling for your shapes. If you want something super curvy, clean, crisp, very precise, the pen tool is going to give you more precision. Now, the pen tool is not intuitive to start with. The cool thing about the pen tool is that it's in every graphic design tool. It's in InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, After Effects. It's in basically every single design app out there. So it's worth learning, but it's not like anything you've done in real life. Nothing in real life has prepared you for this tool. It is a uniquely computer style of drawing. And so what a lot of people do is they just start to draw like they do in real life, and they're like, wow, what the heck is going on here? That's not like drawing. And so how do we do this? So let me just hit delete to get rid of that. So with the pen tool, there are 3 kind of points that you can create. And with those 3 kind of points, you can draw anything that you can imagine. Mastering this is the challenge. I'm going to make it look easy because I've done this for decades. And I'm going to walk you through the process to try to explain it, but it's going to take practice. As much as I tell you how to do it, when you try to do it yourself, it's probably going to feel unintuitive because you've just never done it before. It's like, imagine never picking up a paintbrush. You don't expect yourself to be great with a paintbrush, right? It's going to take some practice. But let me give you the tips of how to use this. Clicking is making straight lines. So every time you click, you are putting a point down. These points are places you can manipulate the line. The selection tool lets you move the entire shape. The direct selection tool lets you move an individual point that you've made. So these points, which are called anchor points, you're anchoring the line at that particular place. They can always be moved later. You can always edit these things. You can add them, you can remove them, you can change them whenever you want. But the pen tool is initially going to plop them down in specific places. It's like playing connect the dots. Click, 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 and you've got a shape. And so that's the easiest part of this. If you're drawing just a straight line, you can hold Shift to keep yourself on a 45 or 90 degree angle. So I could draw like a little bit of a skyline. Now here I'm drawing with a fill. I really should be drawing with a stroke in this case. So let me go to my color panel. So let me go to my color panel here, and I'm going to click these little double arrows. These double arrows let you open and close it. Like, they might be small by default, but you can click those double arrows to expand it. So I don't want a fill, I want a stroke. I'm going to click the little swap button up there, swap them. So now I have a stroke with no fill. So here I'm holding Shift, drawing a skyline. When you're all done, you switch out of the tool to stop drawing with the pen tool. So click, click, click goes the straight line to make straight lines, right? So that's one thing we could do. We can click, 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 click. And when we get to the curves part, that's the less intuitive part. So if we're going to draw a curve, we're going to draw a curve by dragging. So fundamentally, we're still creating points. Like, it's going to go from point A to point B. The question is, how do we get there? If you click and you click and you click, you're making a straight line between those points. But what I want to do is I want to go on a little detour. I want to go in a different direction. Instead of going right from one point straight to another point, I want to curve in between. So that's where the drag comes in. You drag out a handle, and it's still going to draw the line from the point that you made and go to the next point you make, but it's going to give a little twist along the way so you can curve it. So these handles that we're dragging out, those control the direction and distance that it goes in between your points. So the way that I'm doing this is I'm pressing down, holding the mouse, and dragging, and now I release. I press and hold and drag out these handles, and then I release. If you click and let go, you've already committed to making a straight line. So don't click and think you can come back in later. You got to press and hold to pull out these handles, and then let go. Press down and hold, and then drag out these handles. And these are your curves. Now, when you get to a corner, like a pointy thing like this. So for example, if I'm making like a wave, so imagine in your mind a wave. I'm going to use the pencil tool to get you thinking about this. So you're thinking about a wave like that. How would you draw a wave like that? Now, first of all, that's a pathetic looking wave. We want to make that look better, because that's the problem with the pencil tool, is it's very free form and not very good. It has its place if you want more organic stuff. There's some things you can do with it, so I'm not completely bashing on the pencil tool. There's a time and a place when I want to use it, but right now I want to be precise. So I'm going to use the pen tool for this. I'm thinking about this bottom curve. So it's kind of starting here, going down a little bit. So if I go from this point, I'm going to click and hold, and it's coming over and down a little bit. And then I let go. And then I come over to here. Now, when I click and drag up, I'm pushing my line up, see? And actually I started a little too close to my wave here. Let me start down here. So I'm pressing down, I'm heading over and down a little bit, and then I'm going to come over here, I'm going to finish this part of the curve. So you kind of pick it into little parts. Now this curve is heading up a little bit. Then it's coming around the crest here, and it's heading down, so I'm clicking and dragging down. Now I know it's not quite precisely perfect here yet. I'll come back in and fix it. But see, now my problem is, now this is a smooth curve still. I don't want it to be a smooth curve. I want this corner point. I want to come back and make a pointy point on this. It's a pointy point. So now I need to hold Option on the Mac or Alt on Windows and point this handle back. And now I've made a pointy point. I've made a corner. Now I can drag again to kind of control that curve, let go, and I can draw one more time, let's say like this. Now, I know this is looking pathetic right now still, but don't worry. I can come back in with my direct selection tool and I can move these points around. So I've specifically positioned these points in approximately where they need to go. And so like this can come bigger, right? So like this can come up, this can come bigger. I can push this further out. If I want this, I can push that further out. I can flatten this. If I want to flatten that part of the wave, same thing over here. I can flatten this if I want to flatten that part of the wave. So I get to choose how curvy these things are by manipulating these handles. This is what takes a little while to get used to, but you can see how this pencil path, it created a ton of little points. And the problem with having a ton of these little points is that every little point is a place that I can wiggle the line, and it doesn't create nice smooth curves. It's easier to have fewer points, and the way to get fewer points is by you putting them where you need them to be. So if I was creating this fire, I would be zooming in here, and I'd be starting here, and the line is heading this way. Let go. And then this is kind of, it starts to flatten out around here. So I'm going to put another point and drag here to kind of flatten that out. And let go. Then I'm going to come here, and this is heading up, but like in a little bit. See how when I twist this, you're controlling like the distance and the angle here. So what you want to play with is how far you drag and the direction you're dragging. Be careful not to put your points too close together, because then they're going to bind up with each other. And when you put your points too close together and these handles get too big, you see how it kind of binds up in an ugly way. So don't put your points too close to each other. Now, right now I'm heading out that way, and it's a smooth curve. I don't want a smooth curve. I want a pointy point. I want a corner. So I'm going to hold my Option or Alt key and point myself back in the right direction. And then I come in here and I finish that curve. And again, I need a pointy point. I need a corner. So I'm going to hold Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows. Point myself in the right direction, and then pull this out, drag this way. And you can change things around a little bit. In this case, it's a very precise thing that I'm tracing on, but let's say you're doing something imprecise, very loose kind of hand drawing. You can improvise, you can change things around, do whatever you want. And you can always come back in later and fix things. Again, I have this corner, the smooth curve. I want a corner. So I'm going to hold my Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows. And I just keep switching back and forth between these smooth curves and the corners that I want. So I hold that Option or Alt key whenever I hit one of those pointy corners. So these are just a regular click and drag, like one motion. Just click, hold down, and drag. And then here I hold that Option or on Windows Alt key and point myself in the right direction. The bigger the curve's going to be, the bigger this handle's going to be. The smaller the curve, the smaller the handle's going to be. This takes experience to get used to how far you need to drag and exactly in what direction. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. And then I will drag down on this like so. Hold Option or Alt, point myself in the right direction. Do another drag here to kind of twist. See, anytime that the line is twisting, you need to put a point there to twist it in a certain direction. Then it's twisting this way, so I need to make another one here. But now I'm at a pointy point. I'm at a corner, so I hold Option, point myself in the right direction. And there I pulled down a little bit too much, so let me go back and hold Option or Alt again and pull that back a little bit. That was too big of a handle. See, if I make my handle too big, I'm pushing it too far in that direction. If I make a smaller handle, then I'm not pushing it as far in that direction. When in doubt, go with smaller handles. And then when I come back to my final point, I'm going to end on a corner. So I'm going to hold Option or Alt again and drag through that corner to end on a corner. And then in the end, I've got fire, like literal fire. I can go back in with my direct selection tool, go back into any of these points, and I can make the fire a little thicker. I can make it pointier. I can make it thicker just here. But by having a few select specific points, I get a very nice, crisp, clean shape. They can be used at any size. And I can pop that over my background here, and I've got my nice little icon. So those are just some of the fundamentals of how to use Illustrator to do drawing. Of course, there's a lot more things that we can get into, but wanted to hopefully get you started doing some drawing. The pen tool definitely takes some mastering, but we just wanted to introduce it in tonight's seminar. And don't forget that you can just start with some of the basic primary shapes and put those together using the Pathfinder to create some really cool things. Let me head back over to my presentation here. Oh, and actually one other thing before I do this. So thinking about like logos, let's say, for example, you have a piece of type, and let's say you're creating a logo, right? So let's say, for example, the Noble Desktop logo. So Noble Desktop. Let me make this type bigger, and I'll push this down here. So I used, when I designed the Noble Desktop logo, I used a font called Orbitron. And so I used Orbitron, and I liked Orbitron, but there was a weird thing in the K that I didn't like. And I think I probably used either the medium. I think I used the medium weight. So I wasn't fond of this length here in the K. And so I wanted to get rid of that. And what if I want to bring down the P? What if I want to change the angle of the T? What if I want to bring the T up? What if I want to go in and change things? So you can take this type, which right now is type, right? I made it with the type tool. I just clicked, typed out my text, changed my font. I can turn this into art. So right now, if I look at this in outline view, these aren't outlines. This is a piece of type. So I can turn it into outlines by going to type and saying create outlines. When you create outlines, it's no longer going to be type anymore. This is now art. If I go into outline mode, now these are individual outlines, meaning paths. I can now have access to all of its points. Now it's not type anymore. I can't go retype out text. I can't change the font, but I don't want to. I like the font. I just want to change the shape of things. So now I can go in with my direct selection tool, and I can grab individual points. I can grab one point by itself and move it, or I can drag a selection over multiple points and like pull that down. I can drag a selection over all of these points, and then let me zoom in a little bit more so we can see this better, and then I can slide them over. So, I could get rid of that entire part there if I didn't want to. I could pull this over and start to have it kind of follow the shape of the O. I could say, you know what, that D is just too short. Let me make it a little bit taller. Maybe the E, I want to angle that. So you can go in there and do all these things to customize your shape to create a logo. Here. Somebody's asking, aren't fonts governed by a copyright license? So it depends on the font as to what the license is, if you can change it. Most fonts, you can use those fonts, and once you've converted it into art, you can manipulate it and change it. It's technically possible that the license of a font won't allow you to do that, but mostly licensing of fonts is about whether you can use something commercially or non-commercially. So like you might be able to download like some free font online, but it says free for personal use, you pay for commercial use. Generally, once you pay for commercial use, you can typically do whatever kind of art stuff you want, as long as you're not like turning it back into a typeface to resell to other people. Like if I just made these little tweaks and called this the Danatron font and then resold it, like that they probably would not allow. But as long as I'm just keeping it as a piece of art that this becomes a logo, typically the licensing of commercial fonts allows you to do that. Obviously, you should read the license that comes with your fonts, and some fonts that are free allow you personal and commercial use. It depends on the particular font. If you are looking for fonts, you can go to fonts.adobe.com. These fonts are included with your Creative Cloud subscription. So let me just sign in really quickly here. Actually, you know what? I have Safari open, and I'm logged in Safari. So fonts.adobe.com. I'm already logged in there. So you can browse fonts and just kind of look through them. There's different filterings that you have over here. So if you're looking for a particular kind of font, like let's say you're looking for a calligraphic font, you can find a particular font that you want. And all of these fonts are available through your Creative Cloud subscription. So if you click on the activate button, then that's going to turn it on. It's going to download it to your computer, and you can use these fonts on any app on your entire Mac or PC. Whether they're Adobe apps or not, you can use them in any app. So you could use them in Sketch, you can use them in PowerPoint, you can use them in any app. And you know, you can read the licensing deals here, but you can see that you can use them in design projects, in websites, you can embed them into PDFs, you can use them in video. If you want to read the full FAQ, you can read more about them, but basically these are meant for designers to use in their projects. If you get them from other sources, you just have to be careful of what those licenses are. Adobe Fonts is just one place you can get fonts. These happen to be all included in your Creative Cloud subscription, so you may as well take advantage of them. And oh, they were actually just under 2,000. Looks like they added about another 200 fonts because they were just a little bit under 2,000 just a little bit ago. So it looks like they added almost 200 more fonts. So they are always adding additional fonts in here. And so these come with your Creative Cloud plan. You may as well take advantage of those. But you can use fonts from other places. You know, Adobe's not the only place to get fonts that are there. So yeah, so that's how you can start creating a logo using a piece of type, turn it into outlines, and start to tweak it, and you know, add other things. You know, like we added the if I go back to my presentation, I added the N over here, so put in little color blocks and stuff in there, and I have the noble be a little bit bolder than the desktop so that you focus on the noble part. So a lot of people just call us noble, even though we're officially Noble Desktop. So so yeah. So obviously there's a lot more of stuff that you can learn with Illustrator. There's a lot to the program. If you want to learn more, well, first of all, just as far as getting good with Illustrator, practice is important. You want to work in Illustrator as much as you can, whether you're drawing icons, designing logos, editing somebody's graphic that you found online, you downloaded it, maybe you found an icon, you want to edit it, creating patterns if you're doing fashion design, like whatever you want to do that as much as possible to practice Illustrator. Illustrator especially, you know, drawing things with the pen tool, a lot of that requires practice to get good. And so at first it'll feel foreign and weird, and then the more you do it, the more intuitive it feels. Eventually you start to get used to it and you can just draw without kind of thinking about it. So practice makes perfect with all of these apps, but especially Illustrator, especially drawing stuff. The more you do it, the better you'll get. I remember the first time I started drawing, everything just felt so weird and I was frustrated. I'd make mistakes, but the more that I did it, eventually, like now I could just do it and I don't even think about it. I could just go in there and draw any shape that I want. So we do have additional classes for Noble Desktop. We're located physically in New York City, but we are doing we offer our classes live online as well. We are in New York City, so all of our classes are done in Eastern time. And even before the pandemic, we were doing classes where people would come in person and they'd attend live online. So just keep in mind that any of the times that you see would be New York time. So they're all Eastern time. So if we're going to do a day class from 10 to 5, that would be Eastern time. If you're doing a night class from, let's say, 6 to 9 p.m., also Eastern time. So all of our online classes are done live online. They use Zoom. So you connect in with the other people that are in the class, and we share the instructor screen so you can see the instructor demonstrating and talking about things, just kind of like you have in this seminar here. But in classes like this, they also come with a workbook with step-by-step instructions that you can go through and practice your projects. So unlike these free seminars, which are just lecture style, the classes themselves, those are hands-on classes. So you're not only going to be learning, but you're also going to be using the app and getting better with it during the class itself. So we do have a class for Illustrator, and in Illustrator we can have the boot camp, which is an 18-hour class that meets during the day, would be 3 days in a row, or if you're doing it at night, it would be for 3 weeks. So it would meet, like, let's say a Monday and a Wednesday, or a Tuesday and a Thursday for 3 weeks. So that'd be 3 weeks at night. Or if you're doing weekends, like on a Saturday or Sunday, it would be 3 weekends. So 3 Saturdays in a row or 3 Sundays in a row would be the 18-hour class. If you just want to get a little bit of hands-on experience in a hands-on class, we do have an Illustrator in a Day, which is the first 6 hours of that boot camp class. So if you just want to take the first 6 hours just to get your hands wet, just have a hands-on class where you start to get into the pen tool and learning how to create some of the basic stuff, then you could get started with that. It is enough to get started with Illustrator. But if you know you want to learn it more thoroughly, then go for the boot camp, which is basically the in a day first 6 hours plus 12 hours of additional stuff in there. We also have bigger certificate programs. So if you're interested in more than just Illustrator, you could do something like, for example, a graphic design certificate, which is going to include multiple classes. So in here, you learn in the graphic design bootcamp, you learn InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator. So these are the 18-hour boot camps for each of these individual apps. So InDesign is for doing page layouts. So if you're doing books and magazines and multi-page documents, it's really where text and color and photos and everything kind of comes together in multi-page documents. That's what InDesign is good for, primarily print-oriented. Photoshop is for retouching, and then we have, of course, Illustrator, which we talked about tonight. We also go over graphic design concepts, so color, composition, like what makes good design, and so that you can actually start building designs to put into a portfolio. So first learn the apps, and then learn design theory so that you can put those apps into practice building good designs. That's our graphic design certificate. So if you want to learn some design as well as how to use the apps, then you can take a certificate program. If you're just interested in a particular app here or there, you can take the individual class for just that particular app. And so we're located in New York City if you want to come for one of our in-person classes, or you can do these things live online, of course, as well. So I hope this has been helpful for you to get started. For those of you who are attending live, if anybody has any questions, I want to open this up to some questions. Okay, so let me go back over because I see some people were asking some questions here. Expand appearance. So when you see expand appearance is when you take like strokes and fills and you want to break them apart into their different pieces. So if you want the stroke to be one thing and the fill to be another, and maybe if there's a drop shadow for that to be another, expand appearance will break apart all of the pieces of the appearance. Appearance is your fill, your stroke, your effects, all the things you can add in the appearance panel in Illustrator. So it breaks it apart. It literally expands it, kind of breaks it apart into its component pieces. All right, so Andrew is asking, I am used to a white background with the tools and the measurements in black. Just the interface color. Yeah, so you can change the interface color. First of all, all the Adobe apps default to the dark interface, but you can change the user interface. So if you go over to the user interface preferences, which are under Edit Preferences on Windows, Illustrator Preferences on the Mac, we can go to User Interface. And if you like the light user interface, you can use the light interface. So, but everything's still in the same place. It's just different aesthetics of where things are. So that's personal preference. You can change it back if you want. And that's true of all of the Adobe apps, like Illustrator, Photoshop, and Design. They all have a light one. All right. Let's see here. Oh, somebody was asking if you take your stuff from Illustrator and you open it up in Photoshop, will the thickness of the stroke translate to be the same? Yeah, it's not going to change your appearance of things. So, you know, it's not like this stroke is going to get thinner if you take that over to Photoshop. So, yeah, so however you have this, if you take this stuff into Photoshop, let's say you place it in or you copy and paste it in as a smart object, that stuff translates over to Photoshop and it still keeps the same appearance. Oh, somebody's asking, can you save something so it's usable in CS6? So when you're saving a file, so let's say I save as, I'm going to save this to my computer. Cloud documents are so you can share with other people and like collaborate with other people. But for right now, I'm just going to save it to my computer. So let me just save it to my computer. And I'll put this into here. I'm going to save it as an Illustrator file, Adobe Illustrator file. Let's click Save. Oh, actually, let's put this is version 2. So you can choose which version of Illustrator you want to save it in. So right now it's the current version, which is, and actually, I guess they didn't change the file format. So even though I'm in Illustrator 2021, it's still showing Illustrator 2020. So 2020, 2021, same file format. But if you do need to save back to an older version, you can save back to like Illustrator 6 if you need to. So you can save once. Just keep in mind that it's possible if you do things that require the new version that the file might be less editable. If you need to open it back up, it might change the file somehow. So just be careful of that. Like, you know, saving in a legacy old format may cause certain changes like text and stuff. Some things could be lost or undergo a change. So it'll do the best it can, but it might not be able to keep the document exactly as it is. All right, so let's see here. Somebody's saying, how would you export a single shape, not everything on the board? So there are a couple ways you can do that. So when you go to, let's say you're doing something like Save for Web, for example. Like if you do Save for Web, this is going to take everything on your document. So that's not going to work in Save for Web. If you do, and same thing actually for export as, like export as is going to take like the whole thing that you have. If you do export for screens, in export for screens, here you can actually choose to like make certain assets, but you have to set those up in the export panel first. So it's a bit more of a process. So they kind of mention that. So the asset export panel lets you take certain assets, like you can drag just one thing in. And now, okay, this is actually two things. So let me undo. I need to group those. So group them together. And then I can drag that in. And so now this is an asset. I can give it a name. So I'll call it fire. And then you can choose how you want to export it. Like now, mostly this is geared for a web, a web export. So like, do you want a PNG? Do you want a JPEG? Do you want an SVG, scalable vector graphic? So like if I was going to put this on a website, I would typically want an SVG file, but that way I get just that one part of that. It is focused mainly on app use. Like if you're going to export to like an iOS or Android app or web use, that's mainly the focus of this. If you want to do things like, let's say for print or something else, really they want you to just make like a separate artboard, put it on its own artboard and export it that way. This asset export is really for taking pieces of it to use for apps and websites. And then once you're done, you can select the thing that you want to export and click export, and that'll actually create the file for you. All right. All right, well, I think that wraps it up. So thank you so much for joining us again. And if you haven't already subscribed to us on YouTube, go subscribe to our channel so you can get notifications of future videos as soon as we post those. And thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the seminar and gotten a lot out of it. I look forward to seeing you in a future Noble Desktop class or certificate program.